So you all should have seen a record thing pop up. So tonight, I'm Fred Putnam. I'm with the Vermont Beekeepers Association, and I'll be doing the presentation here. But I have tonight the All-Star Support Team for my Zoom All-Star Support Team. So the Vermont Beekeepers Association name, it's actually Sydney Miller. She's from the Vermont Bee Lab, and then Colin Whitehouse, who many of you have already seen here on these workshops. He presented last week, and he is our technical guy on the VBA board. But anyway, and I'm Fred Putnam. I'm with the Vermont Beekeepers Association also. So I noticed in the sign up on the list of attendees, some of the folks here I think, have had bees for a while. So just so you know, this won't be a bee class, and it won't be a beekeeping workshop. It's going to be information to help people who may not have bees yet, or who are just getting their bees, to know what they're getting into or what they need to be thinking about doing to be successful as a beekeeper. And also maybe help them decide if they really want to even be a beekeeper. When I first got started in beekeeping, I did take a class. 50% or more of the people who were taking that class with me decided this was way more than they thought it was going to be and never became beekeepers. And then some of the rest of us did. And so that decision process is what we're going to try to help you through here tonight. Provide enough information so you can say, is this for me, or is maybe it not for me? And I almost didn't get into beekeeping because I sat in a class your first year in beekeeping, and the terminology and the biology was almost overwhelming. But I went on to learn what it was all about, and that's what we're going to talk about here tonight. So I'm going to share screen here. So you should see a screen that says considerations for a prospective beekeeper. Now, I didn't ask you all to raise your hands because there are too many people for me to actually see all at once anyway, but I'm presuming that most of you are either have not gotten bees yet, or are thinking about being a beekeeper, or have bees on the way and want to know what you need to be thinking about. So that's kind of what we're going to cover here tonight. So first of all, the business of beekeeping is called apiculture, practice of raising honeybees, and the methodologies behind it. Apiculture isn't really an altruistic or noble cause, it's an agricultural endeavor. And the honey that we produce and the bees that we produce are agricultural commodities. They're specialty crops. Just like maple, veggies, apples, nuts are all considered to be specialty crops. That's what honey is as well. So as a beekeeper, you would be producing an agricultural commodity. So honeybees are also almost in almost every state, including Vermont, are considered to be livestock. So you'll be caring for a lot of livestock, more than most dairy people in the state could even dream of caring for. But they're little things; they're not as big. So also, as a beekeeper, you will be an apiculturist. You'll be a person who tends bees. Now, one thing before we get going too far, it's okay with me if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions as we go. If something pops up and it's not clear, you're welcome to do that. Go ahead. It sounded like somebody already had a question. You can put it in the chat, but I encourage you, if you want to, just speak up. You don't have to type stuff into the chat. You can stop, and I will stop periodically here and ask if there are questions as we go. But you're welcome to pipe in, hey Fred, and I'll stop. So definitions, just to clarify, when I talk about a hive, I'm talking about the house. The hive is a physical structure. It is not a living thing. The colony is the living thing. That's the bees. That's the collection of bees, the living honeybees. That's the colony. So when I refer to a hive, we're going to be talking about pieces and parts. And we talk about a colony, it'll be the living superorganism inside the hive. So things to consider before getting honeybees. Number one, you'll be stung. It's a fact of life, you'll be stung. I've this year finally got myself one of those really nice ventilated suits. They're a little more expensive, but I don't get stung near as much as I used to with a standard jacket and veil or jeans or whatever. But you will be stung no matter what. And there's a lot to know, and it takes time to learn stuff. So you're going to have to allow for the learning process. Getting started is not cheap, and we'll talk about what that means. And tending these living creatures, as I said, takes time to tend them as well, not just to learn. So it takes time to learn, and you have to allow for that. And it also takes time to take care of them, as it does with any other kind of livestock. And my thing doesn't want to go forward here. Eventually it will. There we go. So beekeeping ethics. So responsible beekeeping is more, like I said, than a benevolent endeavor. It's more than plunking a hive in the backyard or getting some honey. Back before 1988, that was kind of what beekeeping was all about. That was before the parasitic mite, the ectoparasitic mite, Varroa destructor, was introduced into North America, and within 2 or 3 years had spread across the entire of North and South America, Central America too. And it's ubiquitous. The Varroa mite transmits viruses, like mosquitoes transmit viruses to us, and those viruses have mutated over the years and become ever more deadly. And that's the wall that we face in beekeeping. And it takes a lot of knowledge to be able to figure out how to get past that. So tending honeybee colonies can be a lot of work. It can take time and money, and it comes with ethical husbandry responsibility, similar to those that you have when you're taking care of cows, sheep, goats, chickens, anything like that. It's the same kind of responsibility ethically, is to take care of, is to provide the care is necessary for them to be helpful. But the extra challenge with beekeeping, and I grew up on a dairy farm, and we grew lots of crops. We tended a lot of different kinds of animals. And there's nothing that is quite as sensitive and delicate as honeybees. They're insects, and they're incredibly delicate, incredibly prone to perturbations by a lot of different things. So the fact that they're insects adds an extra challenge to this endeavor. And the screen is locked again. Be patient, it'll move. There we go. So time commitment. It takes time to acquire the knowledge necessary to care for your colonies. And it's critical to understand that if your colonies become unhealthy, they become diseased, they become with a high virus load or other kinds of diseases, they can infect and afflict neighboring honeybee colonies. And also, Samantha is well aware of this. Her lab has done a lot of research on this. Can also affect native pollinator populations like honeybees. So we have to do a good job taking care of our honeybee colonies to keep them healthy, so we don't impact negatively our neighboring honeybee colonies and the native populations. We also have to be available to care for colonies during critical times like spring and early summer, during swarm seasons when there are strong nectar flows going on. And this is the kind of stuff you learn as you become a beekeeper. You have to be around to prepare for them in the fall and to do your winter checks. So long summer vacations, maybe not, especially during swarm season or at times when the nectar flow is really strong, and it can be incredibly strong here in Vermont and New Hampshire, and if you're in neighboring New York. In the Northeast, our spring, early summer nectar flow can be incredibly strong, requiring action on your part, so you can't really be away. You can take vacations, it's just you have to time them. And regular systematic pest and disease monitoring and control, that's ongoing throughout the season. You've got to be available for that. Winter prep actions in the fall, and we do some workshops on this later in the year. It's a critically important thing to prep your colonies and your hives to get them through the winter. And then during the winter, as Colin talked about last week, doing winter hive checks. So here's the thing to think about as a new beekeeper, and this is the person I sat with in my beekeeping class, this is exactly what she was thinking. If your life is already very busy, she had kids, she had a business she was running, and other things going on, and it became apparent to her that adding one more layer of work on top of what she was already doing just wasn't going to work. And several of the people, quite actually, I'm not sure what drove some of those to think the same thing, but a number of folks in the class I took realized that there was so much involved with beekeeping. It's sort of like having a farm with animals. You have constant tending to do. That layer of extra work just wasn't for them. So think about that. as we go through this. If you're already pretty busy, beekeeping might not be for you yet. Maybe later in life when you're not so busy, but maybe not right now. So financial commitments, and we're going to talk a little more in detail this. The first colony that you set up is going to cost you somewhere over $1,000 to almost $2,000 for one colony, the first one. That's the financial reality, and we'll show you why that is. The second colony won't cost as much because you have some things that are required to even get started in beekeeping, and like I said, we'll show you what those are. But it's not a cheap thing to get into. You know, as you get more colonies, the cost per colony to increase size is not as great, but the first ones are not going to be cheap. And also, the other thing is that if you're in it to save the bees, keeping bees might not be the best way to help the bees unless you can commit to time and the resources, and the time for learning and the time for tending and the resources to become a really good beekeeper. You might be better being a really good land manager, like taking care of your growing things that are pollinator friendly, staying away from insecticides. We'll go over that a little bit later. Ben, you have your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Couldn't hear you fine.
Okay, great. Can you talk a little bit about the financial commitment of like
Yeah, we're
the
going to
cost
talk
of
about that in detail toward the end.
okay, so
I'm going
the
to show you
breakdown
what
of
I'm going to show you what the components are that make up that cost.
okay, great, thank you.
Or maybe, on the low end, you can do some stuff on your own, and the high end, you can do stuff that's not on your own. But in the end, I'll show you what makes up those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, and I talked about stings are inevitable. And here's the thing about stings: even when you're wearing personal protective equipment, every person is different. Number one, in how prone to being stung they are. I am very prone to being stung. No matter what I do, I have to suit up, I have to glove up, or I'm going to be stung repeatedly. Some people can go just wearing a veil, short sleeve shirt, and it works fine for them. They rarely get stung. Bees don't like everybody as the same. And for me, they really come after me if I'm not suited up. So I have to make sure that I'm suited up. You may have to too. Maybe you can get by without PPE. Maybe you can. But regardless of that, stings are going to be painful no matter what. They hurt like crazy. Reactions can be, especially when you're first beginning, you can get swelling and itching. You can have the back of your hand and your forearm puff up, and it might be that way for a few days or a week or two, and it might be really itchy. You can end up with, I had a mentee once who developed anaphylaxis after 2.5 years of beekeeping, and he almost died. It took 3 EpiPens to get him to the hospital. So if you're not certain about how you might react to a honeybee sting, see an allergist before you get your bees. So check this out first. If there's any question at all, see an allergist and get tested. And my PA, even though I don't have much of a reaction to bee stings any longer, says, you're working alone. There's nobody around. Nobody can see where you are. You're out in the middle of a field and where there's nobody around. And so you really should carry an EpiPen just in case. The response time for a rescue squad is going to be more like 30 to 45 minutes. She says carry an EpiPen, and that's just to be cautious. But you talk to your doctor about this, and don't go to Facebook and ask. People on Facebook don't know squat about medical stuff. Maybe you'll find somebody there who's a doctor, but don't count on it. Check with your doctor if you want medical information. Don't go to Facebook for that. All right. So a couple of things about what's going to be required. If your apiary, which is the place where you have your honeybee colony or colonies, is called an apiary, and it has to be registered with the state. It costs $10. And what that does is it allows a communication channel between the Vermont State apiculturist, our bee inspector, to you to transmit information about things that might affect your honeybee colonies that you're in your apiary. And it could include mosquito spraying, invasive pests that they've found, and it could include certain diseases like American foul brood, which, if you haven't kept bees yet, you don't know what it is, but it's a deadly, no comeback from kind of disease. So if that's around, you want to be notified of that so you can keep your eyes open for it. But that communication link is really important. So it's a legal requirement, but also there's a benefit to having it. It's only $10. It is a big benefit. So there's also a thing called a 2-mile rule for apiaries. Now, if you only have one colony, or if all of your colonies are on your own land, you can ignore this part. And I'm not going to get deep into this, but if you have 10 or more colonies, you're considered to be commercial. And if you're commercial, then when you establish apiary on someone else's land that you don't own, you have to do it in a way that there's not another commercial operation within 2 miles of that spot. So you have to clear this through the state bee inspector. This probably, if you're just getting started in beekeeping, this is not going to be a concern, but it is out there if you decide to become bigger. Once you reach that 10 threshold, once you reach number 10, you are commercial, and that limits where you can put apiaries that off your own land. On your own land, you can have as many as you want, but off your own land, not so. So there's one more thing in the state law that's really important: mandatory reporting of this disease called American foul brood. And if when you take a beekeeping class, which we're going to recommend later, they're going to show you what American foul brood looks like. And if there's any question about it, contact the state apiculturist, and she or her assistant will come out and check for you to see what the situation is. But American foul brood is mandatory reporting, and that's in pretty much every state in the country. So you need to know what American foul brood is. So this is part of the education process. There are a lot of things like this that you're going to need to know about to be a successful beekeeper. Diseases and pests are but one group of things. So here's a link to the Vermont Apiary Program. If you do a Google search for Vermont Apiary Program, you'll come up with this page. You don't have to. You can take a phone picture of it if you want. I'll bet either Sydney or Colin could put this link into the chat. But if you just do a Google search for my apiary program, this will come up, and several things in there there are several things on that page that you might find useful, including requests for inspections, do voluntary requests for inspections of your apiary by the state bee inspector, and some other things. So anyway, it's important to note that page exists. So that's our state bee inspector right there. She's a state apiculturist, pollinator health specialist, or official titles. Her name is Brooke Decker. That's her on both sides. On one side, she's at a seminar someplace, and on the other side, she's at one of my apiaries. So anyway, Brooke is tremendously helpful if you're a new beekeeper. She can't respond to every request, because she's inspecting thousands and thousands of colonies that are being brought into the state of Vermont. And so, especially at certain times of the year, she is really busy. But that website that I just showed you a minute ago has a form to request inspection on her part. And at some point, I'm sure she'll be able to get to your place. But don't be intimidated by the state bee inspectors. That's what we call them, as bee inspectors. She is incredibly helpful. I had a mentee who I was helping along during the pandemic, and she stopped by and was even more helpful. So don't be afraid of calling the state apiculturist in. She's wonderful to work with. So, and as I said, you can contact Brooke at any time. If you have diseases and you're not sure what they are, if you have a mentor, that can be helpful. If you don't have a mentor nearby, Brooke might be able to help you out with that, and you can request an inspection online at that website. So state apiculturist goal is the same as Colin at Sydney, and my goal here as part of the VBA and the Vermont Bee Lab is to help people become successful, to succeed at beekeeping. So, and with that in mind, before we move on, the VBA, Vermont Beekeepers Association, has, I can't remember how many it is in total. I think it's more than 20 workshops this year. Most of them focused on beekeeping, various aspects of beekeeping. So dead out diagnosis: if you had bees and they didn't make it through winter, we have a workshop coming up on how to figure out why they didn't make it. Colin had one last week on winter feeding. We have one coming up on building electric fences for apiaries, which you really want to know about before you have your bees. So we have a series of workshops when we get into spring management, summer management, late season management. What you need to focus on will vary. And we have a series of online workshops. If you're a member of the Vermont Beekeepers Association, those workshops are free to you. That's one of the benefits of members. So just keep that in mind. We have a lot of beekeeping workshops coming up that can help you be successful at beekeeping. That's what the goal of them is. So what do I need to know? So this is what killed me to start with. My wife and I sat in a meeting with the Addison County beekeepers before we got started, and they were talking about mediums and nukes and queen biology and the thing nuke that struck a bell with me. I wrote on my notepad, N-U-K-E-S. Why in the world do beekeepers need nukes? It's like I had no idea what they were talking about. The NUC is an abbreviation for nucleus colony. But I didn't have a clue what this stuff was all about. What's a swarm cell? I don't know what supersedure is, but this is the stuff that you learn that you need to know. It really is important, and there's a lot more. This is just kind of an example. So the learning curve at the start is steep between the state laws and bee biology, colony behavior, reading frames, how you manage the hive boxes, pest and disease detection and control, how you harvest the honey, how you make adjustments for weather. These are all things that you really need to know to be successful at beekeeping. And I'm not telling you this to discourage you. I'm telling you this to make this part of your learning. Make learning a part of your learning how to be a beekeeper, a part of your beekeeping strategy for the first year. Actually, it's every year. It never ends. But especially in the first year or two, you really have a pretty steep learning curve. So if you take a beekeeping class, these terms that I just talked about they'll all make sense. And not only will they make sense, but you'll have these things in a lot of these, the pieces and parts thing will be in your hand. I mean, you'll actually be working with live hives as a part of most beekeeping classes. So if you haven't taken a class already, if you have bees coming, sign up for one. And I have a list of where classes are being held this year in the state of Vermont and nearby. So get to a class. It will be worth every minute you spend to take a beekeeping class, and that will lay a foundation. It won't make you an expert beekeeper, but it'll help all of this other stuff that I've been talking about here be a lot more understandable. So how can I learn what to do? So these are the things you'll need to focus on, to take the time to do in your especially in the first couple of years. But again, things are changing in the beekeeping world, and so your learning can never stay static. But we have the workshops, and that's 2026, not 2025. We have Zoom and other meetings and workshops scheduled throughout the year, right up from now until I think the last one is in late October. On getting some colonies ready. We have 2 workshops in September and October on readying colonies and hives for winter. So there's some texts. Take a class. Absolutely take a class. Don't skip that part. Join the club or association, and doing that in Vermont gets you the free workshops online and also in person. Some of the neighboring clubs, and I'll mention them here pretty soon, already also have some excellent meetings and educational opportunities. So you can also get a mentor. Now in Vermont, the VBA's mentoring program, you have to take a class first and read a certain text, one of a series of texts, just one, but you have to take the class first. So mentoring is not a beekeeping class. Mentoring presumes that you already know something, and this is just to help you get started beyond that point. So if you want a mentor, and a mentor can be extraordinarily helpful. I had 2 when I got started. I got lucky. I had 2 for various things, and it was immensely helpful, but I had taken a class, so I wasn't starting from ground zero, and that's what you need to do to get the mentor. The VBA Beekeeper Helpline is if you have a single question that you need to ask that you don't know about, the Beekeeper Helpline can put you in touch with local beekeepers in your area or any place in the state of Vermont. Colin is one, I'm one, Sydney I think is one as well. People you can call, hey, I got this thing going on with this colony. What's the scoop with that? So it's an individual question thing. That's what the Beekeeper Helpline is all about. And as a member, you get access to that. One caution though, if you choose a mentor, and it's hard to vet these people, but you want to make sure that your mentor is keeping his or her knowledge up to date. They need to stay up to date, stay in the education loop as well. Because they were successful in 1988 doesn't make they're going to be successful today. So make sure that's a question to ask if you do get a mentor. All right. So the training program, there's also a training outlined in addition to the bee schools on the Vermont Beekeepers Association website. It's under member benefits, and just drop down to the VBA training program and there's an outline there. There are some knowledge, skills, and abilities listed. There is the mentoring program described and what you need to do for that. And also there is, in Vermont, we have, at least for the time being, we have a beekeeper certification program, which is, it's not quite like a master beekeeper program, but it's kind of an in-between thing where if you exhibit certain competencies, you can get a certificate and be called a Vermont certified beekeeper. So that is there on the, and this is accessible on the Vermont Beekeepers Association website, just like I showed right there. So beginner classes in Vermont, by the way, with this being recorded, Colin, I think this recording can be kept public, correct? Colin?
Yes, we'll post a link and it'll be on our YouTube channel.
Okay, but it'll be publicly accessible. They won't have to be members to get to this, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. So you can take a picture of this with your phone, or you can get this back on the recording if you want to. But there's this organic beekeeping for beginners. Ross Conrad is held up in Lincoln, Vermont. It's an excellent class. It's a 2-day thing. It is excellent. Better Bee is a beekeeping supplier in Greenwich, New York, but they are our regional beekeeping supplier, and they are beekeeping experts. They have some great folks on staff there. They also hold a number of different classes throughout the year, some of them online and some of them in person. The cost is relatively reasonable. So anything, and these are classes where the instructors will be giving you reliable information. And as a new beekeeper, for me and for you it will be too, the hardest part is knowing whose information you can trust. And so what we're trying to do is steer you toward sources of information where the instructor's knowledge is such that you can trust it. So Ross Conrad is a local expert. Better Bee local a company, but they are beekeeping people who put on some really good classes. Vermont Beekeeping Supply in central Vermont, up in the Barre area. She's actually in Williamstown, but she puts on several classes per year. Sherry is also very knowledgeable. Beekeeper, gives you some good information. We'll be having 2 VBA bee classes, beekeeping classes this year. One is going to be in the south in the Rutland area, date to be determined. We're still working on that, and it'll be coming up this spring. And this is one of the classes that we're talking about is this beekeeping south, and a beekeeping north is held at CVU, that's Champlain Valley Union High School in Heinsberg. And that the dates, she hasn't set the dates on that yet, but that will be coming up soon. The calendar on the VBA website, the calendar of events will list these things once the dates are set. And then over for the Northeast Kingdom folks that are kind of a little further away from where these classes are, White Mountain Apiary in Whitefield, New Hampshire actually does classes and also private instruction. She was a presenter at our recent winter membership meeting back a couple of weeks ago. Very knowledgeable, and you can trust her information also. Even though she's in New Hampshire, we still love her. So, and again, these will be on the calendar of events eventually.
Hey,
So,
Fred.
yes.
Just an FYI that I think the VBA training program link from the slide before, I think our website is under construction. It might have been updated since you took that screenshot. So maybe we can just send that updated. I can't find it on the website just now, so maybe we can send that link out as a follow-up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm referring to your website here pretty soon, but I hear you on that. Colin, I think we'll probably have.
Yeah,
take care of
Yeah,
the
the
link in there
tab
shortly.
for member benefits is not currently there. So
Yeah. Okay. All right. We got it. Okay, so supplemental learning venues, extension services. Vermont Extension Service doesn't do much with apiculture. New Hampshire does. Lawrence County Extension, believe it or not, in Alabama is an excellent beekeeping. Even though they're in Alabama, the instructors they have there, regional regional knowledge, stepping back a little bit, keeping your knowledge geographically regional is really important. And even though Lawrence County Extension is in Alabama, they have national instructors, people who are from all over the country, and they're not focused on Alabama or Florida or Georgia. They're focused on things that are applicable to beekeepers every place, and they have excellent, excellent instructors. So University College and USD labs, the Dice lab out at Cornell is excellent. Established entomology researchers like Sammy Ramsey, whose name you don't know now, but once you take a class, these names will become familiar, and a number of others. Are sources of information, research, knowledge that you can trust. I'm telling you, be really wary about trying to learn from Facebook. Beekeeping Basics on Facebook is a disaster. It's a bunch of people who don't know anything about beekeeping telling people who don't know anything about beekeeping what to do. And once in a while, there's somebody on there who really does know what they're doing. I recognize many of the names, but you really have to. That one is just one you can end up with such bad information on that one that it will be harmful to your bees. So there are certain websites, Facebook pages that might be helpful, but some of the beginning beekeeping Facebook pages are just not the place to go. Find something more local that you can really trust. And I'm sorry if I'm kind of down on that one, but I am down on that one, and for very good reason. It is not a very good website for, even though it says beginning beekeeper or beekeeping basics or whatever, it is a terrible website for beginning beekeepers. You'll get advice from people out of Arizona, out of Southern California, Hawaii, telling you what to do in March and April when we still have snow on the ground. It's like, and worse, but you won't know as a new beekeeper what information there is stuff that you should pay attention to and which is not. So you really have to be careful about your sources of information, and that's why we're advising you to stay local as much as you can, and with these established entities. So clubs and associations, the Vermont Beekeepers Association, New Hampshire, Southern Adirondack Beekeepers Association, excellent organization. They have excellent speakers over there. They're in Middletown, not Middletown, just north of Ballston Spa. New York is where they meet, but they also do some online stuff. They have an online session coming up here in a couple of weeks. And then the Mass Beekeepers Association. All of these associations put on some very, very good meetings. Vermont probably puts on more online than anybody else in our entire region. But SABA and MBA, the meetings that they have, the workshops, the seminars they hold are top notch. So consider becoming members. When you're getting instructional information from these associations, you're going to get pretty good information. So local club meetings, if you want, and particularly if you want some hands-on experience, this is where it's going to happen outside of the class. To further your hands-on experience, the Windham County, Bennington, Addison, Chittenden, and Franklin County clubs all do in-hive workshops throughout the summer, where you can actually get out your hive tool, open up a hive, look at the status of the brood, the queen, the eggs, the larvae. But you can actually do hands-on stuff with your smoker lid and your suit on. So there'll also be some hands-on workshops by up in the Burlington area, the VBA North Yard. It's going to be out near Rock Point, which is the north part of Burlington. And as I said, local club yards and outdoor workshops. So consider joining your local clubs too. Windham and Bennington, there are some dues. For the other clubs in the state, there are no dues. So, and like I said, we strongly recommend joining the VBA. Right now, it costs $15. So it'll be the best $15 for learning that you spend all year. And these other associations as well, they're all really good. Speak highly of all of them. So here are some text, and I'm not going to go through each one of these. This will be in the recording. So you can go back and look at these. All of these are very good books. The Beekeeping Basics, the Natural Beekeeping, First Lessons in Beekeeping is good. It's out of print now, but it's good if you can get a copy of it. Beekeeper's Handbook, the Beekeeping for Dummies, especially that one. All of these are available on interlibrary loan from Vermont Library, so you don't have to buy them. And the thing about texts is, once you've read them once, sometimes you'll go back to them for your first year or two, and then they're going to sit on your shelf because then your learning mode becomes something different than reading texts and going to workshops. I mean, going to in-hive workshops. Once you're at a certain point, then your learning mode becomes something very different. But all of these books, some of them are expensive, very expensive. Honeybee Democracy is very expensive. Natural Beekeeping isn't cheap either. They're very, very good books, and it's good to read them, but you don't have to buy them. You can get them off interlibrary loan. Any library, tell them what you want, and they can get it from any other. Which one of them? I think it was Honeybee Democracy that I borrowed. I'm in Brandon, Vermont, which is south end of the Champlain Valley. And the Honeybee Democracy was located, I believe, in Lyndonville or someplace in the Northeast Kingdom in a little tiny library. But I got it and I took it back. So I didn't have to buy the thing at $50 or whatever it was. Anyway, so other sources, these are events. Better Bee, our beekeeping supplier, Northeast Beekeeping Supply is its official name. They have a date in June. The date hasn't been set yet. We just checked recently, and they haven't set their date yet, but it's a free seminar kind of day where they bring in speakers, established, well-respected speakers to talk about various aspects of beekeeping, some technical, some less technical, and they do have a hands-on component in the afternoon, which is pretty cool. They have an information letter that comes out. There are college classes at UVM, which Sydney knows about, out at Cornell and down at Penn State. Kirk Webster, who's a beekeeper in New Haven, holds an open house twice a year. Kirk Webster is also a very knowledgeable person. And one YouTube site besides our own that you can count on trusting is Mike Palmer. Mike Palmer is a beekeeper up in St. Albans, and he raises, in my personal opinion, some of the best queens, honeybee queens in the world. They are some fantastic queens. So but he really knows what he's doing. He's been at it for a long time, and his knowledge is up to date. He's an expert beekeeper. So his YouTube channel, the videos on his YouTube channel are really, really good. So just be careful on other YouTube sites. Stick with the known stuff at first until you figure out which ones of the other websites, the other YouTube channels are reliable. So do I have the time? Now we're going to get into the details, the time and the money part. And by the way, before we go this far, is any questions up until now with any of this? I can stop here. Okay, we'll keep going then. So it does take time, and this is a small part of a small list of the time commitment required for taking care of bees. Initially, especially as a new beekeeper, you're going to want to be doing in-hive colony inspections every week to 2 weeks, somewhere in that range. And if you're a second-year beekeeper, and in first part of the season during swarming season, you'll want to be on the low end of that, at least doing some cursory checks, checking for swarming. But initially, that's kind of what you're looking at is inspections every 7 to 14 days. Inspections by the time you get suited up, it depends upon how many colonies you're checking. But if you're doing one colony, the check might be 15 minutes to half an hour, and it might be longer depending upon what you're trying to do. Feeding takes a little bit of time. It's not hugely time consuming, but making up the food for a new colony that doesn't yet have enough foragers to do well on its own, that takes time. Swarm detection and control, that can take some time. Probably not something as a first-year beekeeper that will be as big a deal, but as time goes on, once you get into year 2, it is a big deal. Disease and pest detection is something you do every time you inspect. Starting as soon as you get your colonies, you're going to be doing this. And what do you do? Well, this is what you learn in a beekeeping class. Extracting and jarring honey, there's a equipment and time involved with that. Checking for your queens, apiary management, mowing, maintaining your fences, fall feeding. Fall actually, May is a busy time as a beekeeper, but September, October, when you're ramping down for the season, that's really busy. There's a bunch of stuff that you have to do. So fall feeding, weighing, wrapping for winter, and some other things. Final honey draw off or final removing the honey supers, the honey boxes off your hives. All that stuff happens in the last couple of months of the year. And of course, midwinter inspections, and then equipment cleanup, and that can take some time too. So what will you need? This is the money part. So before we get to that, though, Uncle Jack and Aunt Mary might offer you some free old beekeeping equipment that's stacked out in the barn or the shed behind the house, but don't take it unless you can ascertain 100% for certain that the colonies that lived in that old equipment did not have American foul brood. So American foul brood is a very deadly disease. If you get a colony that has it, it doesn't survive. You can't cure it. And the colony and the hive that it's in, all the woodware or the frames, the bees themselves, they have to be burned. So it's a total 100% loss. So you don't want, in the last 2 cases of American foul brood we had in the state of Vermont, came from a fellow who was taking old equipment out of the barn that a family member had many, many years ago that had been infected with American foul brood, but he didn't know it. So they found American foul brood the year 1, and they went back and got some more equipment out of the barn and had American foul brood again the second year, and finally figured out that it was coming from that old stuff in the barn. So American foul brood spores stay viable for 70 years or more. So if that has been out there for the last 30 or 40 years and it had American foul brood in it, it still could be very effective, very infected rather, and end up with killing your colony. And if it spreads to more than one colony, then you lose every colony that it's detected in. So be safe, stick with new equipment. Don't try to cut corners. Unless you can absolutely know for sure that the colonies that lived in that equipment did not have American foul brood. If you don't know, don't risk it. It's not worth it. So here are some basic kinds of equipment. This is what you're going to need. There are other kinds of equipment and there are other configurations, but here are some basic ones. And I'm going to recommend to start with a couple of these to simplify things for you. And then as you move on, if you decide you'd like to try something else, you are welcome to do that. I'm actually going to get my pointer going here, which I could have done before, but I didn't. So this Langstroth, either the long Langstroth or the standard vertical Langstroth, that's this style right here that has boxes and removable frames of different sizes. There are 2 most common sizes are what we call deeps, and then there are another common size we call mediums. There's another size even smaller than that called shallows, but most people just use these 2 kinds here. These are about 10 inches tall. These are about 7 inches tall, roughly. It's actually 9 5/8, but call it 10. But anyway, these are standard frames. Langstroth is the fellow back in the 1800s who devised this method of hive configurations where the honeycomb could be removed in frames and not destroyed. Also, in I think almost every state, and for Vermont for sure, hives, whatever hive you have, whether it's this Langstroth, the long lang, the Warray, or the top bar, they have to have removable frames. It is illegal to have a frame, a hive that does not have removable frames. So it has to be all of these types right here, these 4 that I'm showing you, and some others too, have removable frames. But if anybody tries to sell you something that looks like a trunk of a tree with a bunch of honeycomb inside it, it's not legal in the state of Vermont. Don't get it. Don't go down that road. So a recommendation, if you're starting, just learning from experience, the Langstroth, the vertical Langstroth comes in several configurations. It says 8 or 10 frame configuration. There are some smaller ones too, some 5 frame and 4 frame and 6 frame. They all use the same kind of frames. It's just a matter of the width. The most common type as a beginning beekeeper is either going to be 8 or 10 frame configuration. So here's the thing. If I was starting, I have all 10 frame equipment. If I was starting over again and I knew what I know now, I would have started with 8 frame Langstroth. They have 8 frames instead of 10. The boxes are much, and it's because for 2 reasons. One, the bees build wax in a narrower box easier than they do in a wide box. And number 2, and the primary reason why a lot of people go with 8 frames is that the boxes are lighter. These boxes, these deep boxes down here can weigh 90 to 90 pounds or 100 pounds. They can be really hard to lift, 80 pounds, 75 pounds, but more like 80 or 90 pounds is common. These honey supers, these medium depth boxes can weigh, when they're full, 50 or 60 pounds, sometimes 45, but you're talking a significant amount of weight. 10 frame boxes I'm talking about. With 8 frame boxes, you can cut that down by 15 pounds. So they're a lot lighter to handle. And just the physics of lifting that box when it's not sticking out so far away from you makes them easier to pick up and carry. If you have a bad back or you have very, arthritis in wrists or whatever, these long boxes, and there are different configurations of these too, the top bar being one of them. But the long Langstroth is, if I were going with a long box, it would be the long Langstroth and not the top bar, because you're using standard frames that all of the other beekeeping business uses. These are frames that are readily available from every beekeeping supplier, but you're not having to pick up the entire box. You're picking up frames one at a time, so it's a lot easier to handle them if you have physical limitations that make it hard to pick up 40 pounds or 50 pounds. So long Lang or Langstroth, stick with the Langstroth to start with, and you can move on to something else later. The other advantage of Langstroth is the frames fit into every extractor made these days. Some of the top bars and the Warrays don't fit into extractors. They'll fit into some extractors, but not if you're getting to the point where you're harvesting honey. But the Langstroth frames will fit into modern, actually old-time extractors too, but they will fit into extractors where some of these frames might not. So start out with Langstroth, and then you can experiment afterward. Okay. It seems to be stuck again. There we go. So like I just said, recommending 8 frames is less weight per box. So this is kind of what things look like. This is a medium frame. This is for this honey super is where we want the bees to collect their honey. This is where you would remove honey if you have enough honey, if they make enough honey for you to remove. And down here on the bottom in these deep boxes is where we want the queen to raise brood. That's made new little bees. But anyway, that's kind of what the vertical Langstroth looks like. And of course, you saw the long Lang in the last picture. So should I get a nucleus colony or a package? So if you don't know anything about bees, what the heck does that mean? Well, so here's the thing. A nucleus colony is basically a little colony. It's 5 frames instead of being 20 or 30 frames like the tall Langstroth, 40 or 50 frames like a tall Langstroth would be. They come in a little box. Some people sell them as 3 frames. The most common is 5 frames, and a nucleus colony is basically a fully functioning little colony. It has a queen that's laying. They have foragers. They're making honey, but they're in a little tiny box that you buy, and then you put them into a bigger box. The advantage of that is they're already a going colony. Packages are a little less expensive. They are, and I'm not sure if I have a picture here or not. They're basically about 10,000 bees. And they come with a queen, and you have to install a queen. And sometimes they accept the queen, and sometimes they don't. If you have drawn comb, and if you don't know what drawn comb is, it's basically those frames that I showed you earlier that have honeycomb drawn out on them. The bees have drawn honeycomb on them. And so there's a place to store honey, or there's a place to raise little bees. That's drawn comb. If you have drawn comb, you can get away with a package. If you don't have drawn comb, you should probably stick with a nucleus colony. So if you're buying bees and you haven't bought them yet, and you don't have any drawn comb, you're just starting with frames in a box, best to start with a nucleus colony. What happens sometimes with packages is if they don't have drawn comb, they may just take off. It's called absconding, but you may just lose your bees. And the last mentee I had actually lost her bees twice because she was putting them into a Warray hive, and she had no drawn comb. And so she lost packages twice. She installed, they took off on her, she bought some more, they took off on her, so she had no bees. So we switched over to a Langstroth and started with a nucleus colony, and she made a huge amount of honey in the very first year in one 8 frame, like 88 pounds from one nucleus colony her first year. She happened to be in a really productive area. The nuke is a way to start if you don't have drawn comb. So don't worry about the variety of the bees so much. You'd be more concerned about getting your bees, whether they're packages or nucleus colonies, from reliable sources, whether it's from Better Bee or Mike Palmer, or I don't think he sells bees like that way, but some of the other beekeeping suppliers in the state. And I've got a link here. I've got a link to the sources for bees. And so be more concerned about where you're getting your bees, the quality of the bees that you're getting, than the variety of bees. So yeah, so this is what I just talked about. So the varieties common here are Carniolans, Russians, and you'll learn about these in a beekeeping class. Italians, not so much Italians as much as Carniolans, Russians. There are some Saskatrawgs. There are some bees coming into the state now called Golden West that come from a certain place in California. The fact is that most of your bees are going to be Heinz 57. Even if they're called Russians or Carniolans or they're Saskatrawgs, they're going to be mostly Heinz 57. That's just the nature of how bees reproduce. So where to get bees? The Vermont Bee Lab, Sydney's website, has a comprehensive list of bee suppliers. It's the only place in Vermont where this is located. It's not even on the Vermont Beekeepers Association website any longer. Sydney has put this together, and it's very good. Lists quite a few reliable beekeeping suppliers in the state of Vermont. So that one you'll probably want to take a picture of if you haven't bought bees yet. And if you need some specific recommendations, you can always give a call outside of this meeting. So what will I need and what will it cost? First of all, take a look at this. So do you have money? Yes, well, buy bees. No? Well, do you have a job? Yes, well, then they pay you. Yes, well, buy bees. And if you have money and it's not for bees, well, blasphemy, buy bees. So this whole thing takes you to buy bees. And my favorite is, do you have possessions? Yes, sell them, buy bees. Do you have possessions? No. Do you have a kidney? No, you're a liar. Yes, sell it. Buy bees. I thought this was kind of funny. If you're a beekeeper, it's kind of one of those things you chuckle about it because you get so engrossed in beekeeping that this actually makes sense. Anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. Anyway, what do you need? So those numbers that we talked about in the beginning. So number one, before you get bees, put up your electric fence system. This is one of the most expensive first items, and this is a first colony thing. Once you have one colony, adding 2 or 3 or 4 more colonies you won't require any more electric fence expense. But I can tell you right now that unless you live in the Champlain Islands, if you try to put bees out in your backyard or any place, it isn't a matter of if the bees are going to be attacked by bears. It's just a matter of when. They will be there, even if you're in town. The bears will come into town and destroy your honeybees and your honey and not only the bees, but they'll also destroy the hive. They'll rip it to shreds. So electric fence first, then get the bees. Now, apiary electric fences have some special requirements, and we have a workshop coming up on those. And I unfortunately didn't look that up, but I think it's within a few weeks here. We have a Zoom workshop with troubleshooting guide this year. But before you buy anything for an electric fence, sit through this workshop first. Don't buy anything electric fence. So if you go to Tractor Supply, they have most of what you need, but not all of what you need. That you can't buy an energizer suitable for an apiary at Tractor Supply. But that's what we're going to talk about in the apiary electric fence thing. We have one workshop dedicated to building apiary fences. It's not rocket science, but there's some things you need to know. Your apiary registration, beekeeping classes range from 45 to 145. Books, nothing, because they're on library loan, tools and equipment. And this may be a little on the light side cost-wise. Extracting equipment. To be able to extract honey from the frames, we're recommending, I personally recommend, do not do this technique called crush and drain. It destroys your comb, and getting drawn comb is your biggest challenge as a first-year beekeeper. Getting them to draw beeswax on foundation or on the frames that you have in your box is your number one biggest challenge in your first year. So don't destroy that comb. So that means that in order to harvest your honey, you're going to need an extractor, a honey extractor, a centrifugal machine, and they cost from 600 on the low side for a hand crank mechanical one to 14. They can cost a lot more than 1400 too, but reasonably for a new beekeeper, this is the price range for an extractor. Your woodenware, that's the hive components. Basic starter hive components are probably a little more than that now. Some of the stuff you could build if you could find wood real cheap, but oftentimes if you have to provide the wood, and building a hive is not an easy thing. It requires considerable carpentry skills to build all of the components of a hive. So it's often just a lot cheaper and easier just to buy the basic starter, but 275 is kind of on the low end. Nucleus colonies, they range from 245, and actually some of the overwintered colonies are closer to 300 and something. There are a few spring nucleus colonies that you can buy for like 185, but the range, this is kind of the ballpark range of what a nucleus colony will cost you is a couple $100, and the packages aren't too much less. They might be 175 or 170, but just one colony is going to cost you a couple $100. And to winter hive prep, the expense for prepping for winter, depending upon what you do, it could range from $35 to $65 per hive. So the total ends up being over $1,000 when you start adding all of this stuff up. It's over $1,000. It's not cheap. Now, as I said, for a lot of these expenses, the apiary registration is for good for however many hives you have in your apiary. And actually, and the same with a lot of these things, the tools, the varroa check, the feeders, the personal protective equipment, whether you have one or 100, it's the same cost. So this is a first colony. Subsequent colonies aren't going to cost quite as much, but the startup costs aren't cheap. You're talking over $1,000. And so if monetary concern is, if money is a concern, this might be a situation where you might have to hold off for a little bit. That's for you to decide, not for me to tell you. That's for you to decide. And then, of course, I got to move this thing out of my way here. So the extracting equipment, and then approximately $500 for each additional colony, which is the cost of equipment and bees. Basically, what that is. Any questions on any of that? I know that somebody asked about this earlier. Does that clear up that question?
Yes, it did. If we have time, I'd love to hear I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago about colony loss. If that is kind of factored into that, or is there an expectation you lose 20 or 30% of your hives every year?
Yeah, so that's a really good one, Ben, and let's talk about that at the end. We can, at the end, if you actually have real beekeeping questions, I want to give priority to the new beekeepers who are trying to figure out if they want to even get into beekeeping. But if you actually, after we've gone through that, if you have an actual question about beekeeping, Colin and I and Sydney are wide open to answering those kind of questions. But let's talk about that disease thing at the end, Ben. So then don't let me forget that, okay? So we also strongly recommending getting at least 2 colonies to start, not one. And it's one, and for 2 reasons. I got 2 colonies when I started, and July 1st, and I got them in the latter part of May, early June. And by the time the 1st of July rolled around, one of them was absolutely booming. It had it started out with 5 frames, and now it was 2.5 boxes. It was like 30 frames. And the other one was still in one box. It hadn't even gotten past the first 10 frames. So I asked my mentor, I said, what's going on with this? And his reply was, you ever had kids? I said, yeah, I had 2. He said, were they anything alike? Don't. And that's the same with honeybee colonies. You might have 2 colonies that are totally different. They make a different color honey. They grow differently. They might not grow. In my case, I ended up splitting that one colony, and I made 4 out of it, got 4 queens, and I went through winter with 5 instead of 2. But the only way I would have known that something was wrong is because I had 2 and I had a comparison. And also, if you have a colony that's okay, except it just needs a little help, you can take resources like frames and bees from one colony and put them into that other colony to help boost them along. But if you only have one colony, you don't have that option. So we recommend getting 2 to start with. And actually, this is really conservative. I went to a Southern Adirondack Beekeepers Association meeting 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, I think it was now, and the fellow there was recommending that new beekeepers should start with 5. And the reason for that is with 5, you're more likely to get one that comes through winter. And this is that colony loss thing that Ben was just asking about. Now, I'm not recommending that you get 5. What we're going to try to do is you get 2 so that you have a point of comparison and can share resources. And as you get into beekeeping, there are significant ways that one colony can help another. But we're going to try to help you with your knowledge base to the point where you don't have to have 5, that you get those 2 successfully through the winter, or at least have the best chance of doing that without getting 5 colonies. So that's where we're coming from with this. But you should be considering getting 2, not 1. So, and again, ongoing costs for workshops, apiary registration, we already talked about this, bee food for winter. And the reality is, if you're successful at overwintering a honeybee colony, even just 1, your problem becomes, where are you going to put all the splits that you have to create? These are new colonies that you end up creating to prevent swarming. Where are you going to put them? If you overwinter colonies, it is really easy to expand from 1 to 10 to 50, just like that. 10 the end of the second year, 50 the end of the third year. I mean, it can get out of control, and I've had to take action to not get bigger. I mean, literally physical action to avoid getting bigger. But that's when you're successful at overwintering. That's the problem that you end up with: is where are you going to put all these bees? You end up buying more equipment. You end up getting bigger. But anyway, that's the benefit of all of this knowledge and work that you do, is eventually you're successful and you make your own bees. So the lack of attention, and this gets toward what Ben was talking about, the lack of attention is the likelihood is that you're going to lose all of your colonies. They're either going to die from disease, pest and disease, or they're going to abscond because they're not healthy, which is due to pest and disease most often. Absconding is when the bees just take off. The queen and all of the bees in a colony take off. One day they're there, and the next time you look, there might be 5 or 6 bees left, or maybe none. The thing is totally empty. They took off. So if your lack of attention creates health issues, you could completely lose a colony, and then you have to buy new colonies. And then those unhealthy colonies are spreading out into the neighborhood, into honeybee colonies that somebody else has nearby within a mile, 2, 3 miles, and it's also going to affect the health of native species, bumblebees and others. So you have to commit to taking care of the bees if you want to be a successful beekeeper. So here's the thing about, if your motivation to becoming a beekeeper is about saving the bees, there are some very effective things that you can do to help pollinators in general, not just honeybees, but pollinators in general, without actually going through the work of growing honeybees. So creating favorable pollinator habitats, there is a document on the VBA website called Pollen and Nectar Sources, Vermont Pollen and Nectar Sources. These are plants that are friendly for pollinators. And it's actually, there's some data in there that's pretty interesting, but this is available to anybody. You don't have to be a VBA member to get this. So if you want to try to figure out what can I do with native vegetation on my land or in my backyard, that document is free to you, and you can see the kinds of things that the list of plants that are helpful to promote them. Even if you have forest management, you can promote pollinator health by the kinds of trees that you leave versus the ones you take. The number one thing as a household owner or landowner is avoid pesticides, especially insecticides. Honeybees are incredibly sensitive to insecticides at very, very low levels. We're talking parts per billion. So to the extent that, if you're buying lawn care products or garden products, read the labels and make sure there aren't any pesticides in there, any insecticides. The same with tending any plants or fruits, garden vegetables. Avoid using insecticides. Honeybees, it takes such a small amount, and this is one of the things that we've had a hard time getting across even to beekeepers, is how incredibly sensitive honeybees are to a lot of things, but especially these insecticides that come in house products. Try to avoid them, stay away from them if you can. And then the other thing that's really helpful is there will come a time, and there has been a time in the past, where you can support through the political process causes favorable to pollinators. When we went through the process of trying to get a bill passed that phased out the use of these very powerful neurotoxins called neonicotinoids, neonics for short, we did get the law passed, but it took support from people like you who weren't even beekeepers, took political support and a good amount of it to be able to get that law passed. And that is something that is incredibly helpful to, hopefully, if it continues to be implemented over time, will be helpful to not only pollinators, but to human health. So there are times when you might be asked to support those favorable causes, and standing up, writing letters, calling your politicians, whatever at the time, can be incredibly helpful, even more so than being a beekeeper yourself. So these are some other ways that you can help the bees, but not necessarily be a beekeeper. And there are some people who can do a lot more good for pollinators without having bees than trying to have bees to save the bees. So anyway, just think about that. So we've talked about all this work, and I'm gonna tell you the feeling that I had, and I'm positive that you're going to have, when you've devoted so much to being successful during that first 12 months. So the first year payoffs are, I had colonies that made it through the winter. And when I opened them up in the spring and I saw that they were still there, it was like, whoa, this was a lot of work. And look at this, they're there. They're going into year 2. This was so gratifying to see that happen. And also it gave me more confidence that actually I might be on the right track with my learning, which never stopped, and it hasn't stopped to this day. But it certainly helped me feel like maybe I was doing okay as a beekeeper. Just keep doing what I'm doing and continue on the learning process. I also got a bunch of honey. The first honey, and here's the thing, I didn't even like honey as when I started in the beekeeping. I didn't like honey. I was a maple guy. My whole family does maple, thousands of gallons per year in New York and New Hampshire. And I was going to do the same thing, but I didn't. I got into bees instead, and I'm really glad that I did, for a variety of reasons. But the honey, raw honey, depending upon your location, the first honey I ever pulled off my extractor was, I licked the thing and it's like, wow, this stuff is so good. And that was the payoff of getting my bees through that first winter. Was then I got a bunch of honey. And now I'm in business. I run a small business selling honey, bees, nucleus colonies, beeswax, all that kind of stuff. But that wouldn't have been possible unless the bees made it through the winter. So then we're ready to start year 2 with a bang. And this is what happens. So year 2, and I'm telling you this because this is some of the good part that can happen to you. I mean, it's a lot of work getting there. But if you decide you don't want to, that's okay. There are other things you can do. But if you do decide to, the benefit is that your colonies explode in May, which then creates even more work. Suddenly you're dealing not with trying to get your colonies to survive, but trying to keep on top of how much honey they're bringing in or honey they're making, and how they're trying to split themselves, called swarming, where you lose your queen and a bunch of bees and your production goes way down and all that. So instead of a nucleus colony that weighs, I don't know, 40, 50, 40, 45 pounds, which is a typical weight. Sometimes they weigh 25, sometimes they weigh a little more. This is 5 frames now. The total hive weight by June will be closer to 200 pounds. I actually did this with my mentee who was getting some nucleus colonies last year. Asked her to weigh her nuke, and I had her weigh one of my hives sitting in my home apiary. It was over 200 pounds by June by around the first part of June, and she was getting a nuke that was about 45 pounds. So if your bees die over the winter, you're back to buying more bees, and you've got a 40 or 45 pound colony versus one that makes it through the winter. By June, they have exploded to the point where they already weigh 200 pounds. Likely harvest of over 100 pounds, conservative net value 800 to over $1,000, and a colony can be split to make more colonies. Where this is not possible, you just don't have the same numbers. So the benefit, the reward to doing the learning and doing the work that first year is that this is what you end up with. Every colony is like this, almost every colony. So anyway, that's part of the gratification of being successful at getting bees through the winter, but you have to know what you're doing to make that happen. And that's kind of what we're talking about. So any questions on any of that? And we can, of course, do that follow-up on survival as well. Any questions?
Yes, hi, thank you for that presentation. So I currently live in the city and do not have appropriate property space for management of my own beehive and colony, but I was curious if there were avenues or connections to make with renting, land or doing a trade-based type work for honey or the pollination benefits of allowing someone to use part of their land for beekeeping. I was just curious what opportunities there are in Vermont if someone doesn't have personal property to manage their own hive.
Yeah, I had and probably just my speaker here, but I didn't catch all of that, Meredith. Can you kind of give me a synopsis of that? I was having issues with my speaker here. I'm sorry about that. Just repeat that. Yeah.
No, that's okay. I live in the city, so I don't have appropriate property space to manage my own hive and colony. And I was curious if there are opportunities to rent or do a trade-based type work with someone who has a large parcel of land where we could set up a small hive with one colony just to practice the art of beekeeping.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, there is. Now, as you say, you're in a city and you don't have the space. Why do you say that's an issue?
Neighbors, I live in Rutland City. There's kids, there's pools, close proximity. I don't feel comfortable exposing them to that in case something were to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, just so you know, I used to extract honey for people all over the state, people and individuals, small businesses that didn't have their own extractors. And we have great honey here, and there's some other places in Vermont that have great honey, but Rutland and downtown Burlington had some of the best tasting honey I've ever had in the state of Vermont.
Oh,
Not
awesome.
kidding. There's a guy just north if you're in the city, he's just north of you on the edge of Rutland town. And he produces some incredibly wonderful tasting honey. So the fact that you're in a city doesn't mean your honey is going to be bad. It actually can be very good. And with beekeeping, the flavor of your honey is really the luck of the location. Because on the converse, I extracted from a fellow on the Connecticut River over in Westminster, and his honey had to be the worst honey I've ever tasted in my whole life. It was awful. If I was making honey like that, I wouldn't even be in business. I'd say, to heck with it. go do maple or something. But anyway, it's the luck of the location. But the fact that you're in, and I digress here, but the fact that you're in the city doesn't, you can still make really, really good honey. Now, the space thing is definitely, I get where you're coming from, and there are probably opportunities. I know I've had people come to me saying, hey, can you put some bees here? But I can't, because I have a lot of colonies. I'm commercial by definition in the state of Vermont. And so I fall under that 2-mile rule, where I can't place any colonies that are within 2 miles of somebody else who's commercial. And in the Champlain Valley, those places don't exist. However, if you have less than 10, if you're looking for a place to put 1 or 2 for yourself, you can put them pretty much any place you want if you have a landowner who is amenable to that. And we don't have a contact list for that. We used to try to do that, but we don't anymore because it can get complicated. But that is a definite possibility there of finding somebody, especially if you're small, less than 10. You have to stay less than 10, otherwise that 2-mile rule kicks in. But you definitely can do that.
We actually do still on the website, Fred, have under the member benefits, we can view a list of people that have submitted places they would like to have bees on their property.
Yeah, I don't know how dated that is, but you know, if you do a front porch forum thing in your area, I'll bet you would come up with somebody who would be interested in hosting bees.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate the information. Yeah, and again, new to this, and I want to spend this year just learning about beekeeping, and I definitely want to take the class. And then if I feel confident and ready to take the plunge the following year, I would only want to do one colony, very, very small, just to practice the art of beekeeping, and just kind of go from there. But yeah, unfortunately, I just don't have the property size to manage.
Well, so here's the thing. I think that's a wise strategy to do your learning this year. Get to the in-hive workshop so you feel comfortable working with live bees. Try to do that. Now, and we're recommending that you start with 2. I think at that point in time, you'll know if you're comfortable even having bees. But if you do, start with 2, not 1, because there's a big advantage to having that second colony. You're still small at 2. But there's a big advantage to having that second colony. But think about that as you go through this learning process this year. And if you get to the point where you're comfortable, think about going with 2, not 1.
Okay.
But the process that you're going through is wise. Do your learning, try to get some hands-on experience if you can before you have a lot into it. And then once you are working with live bees, you're opening colonies, you're pulling frames, you're looking for things that if you're comfortable with that, if it really trips your trigger, and I'll bet it does, if you feel comfortable at that point in time, then you'll know you're on the right track, and then you can get your bees next year. But that's a smart way to go about it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the info.
Yep. And those of you who might already have bees on the way for the first time, if you already have bees on the way, but you haven't taken that class, don't worry, it's not too late. Okay.
We have a question in the chat from Bryce. We live near a corn farm and not sure what they use on their crops. Is there a way to protect bees in areas that may use pesticides?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Probably not very good way to protect your bees.
I would say you could have maybe have a conversation with the farmer too and just find out.
Yeah, well, the thing about it is that it depends upon the crop and what they're spraying. You know, the problem with some of the insecticides is that they get applied at planting time. They're in the ground. They're translocated in the plant. They're systemic in the plant, and there's nothing you can do about that. Honeybees typically don't harvest too much on corn or soybeans, but they do go after what's called guttation fluid, little droplets on the stalks of corn that are kind of sweet, sugary. I've actually watched them do this. And if that corn is also laced with neonicotinoids that were coated on the seeds that corn stalk came from, you can't stop that. There's nothing really you can do about that. And the problem is the impact of that kind of thing may not show up until winter when your bees die, because they have pollen that's and honey that's laced with neonicotinoid insecticides. You know, if there's overt spraying, like a nearby orchard or some kind of farm crop, you can protect your hives if you don't have too many by, as Sydney said, talking to the farmer to try to do it at a time or a period of time when the bees aren't harvesting honey, either when they aren't, where the crop is not flowering, or do it from dusk or dawn before the bees are really flying much. So there may be ways of dealing with that, but you have to really talk. You know, orchards are especially good at working with beekeepers if you happen to be dealing with an orchard. But other farms, you may or may not have an opportunity to do very much to protect your bees from the endemic insecticide. The other thing about insecticide use, just so you know, is that the pesticide use in general is that you would think by 2026 we would start seeing a decline in the use of pesticides in the state of Vermont. But in actuality, the pesticide use in the state of Vermont and everywhere else is accelerating upward. It's not level, it's not increasing, it's accelerating upward. So every few years, we've doubled the amount of pesticides being applied out in the environment in the state of Vermont. That's a scary thing. That's a battle. Sydney is on this road. That's a battle that's going to be a long-term one, but there's not a lot that you as a beekeeper can do to protect your bees against that. I'm sorry if that sounded complicated, but it's not a simple situation. So Jerry, is that your name, Jerry?
It's John.
Okay.
Yeah, quick question. I hope this is a great presentation. Thank you very much. And you said a lot. I might have missed it. You listed extractors as optional equipment. That's a big price tag. If you don't get an extractor, how do you get your honey?
Well,
You said you
the basic technique is crush and strain, where you crush the wax and you let it drain out into a bucket. And that's what I'm saying. Don't do that. That is, you're destroying the most valuable resource. One of the most valuable resources that your bees have is the structure in which they can raise bees and store food. The comb is everything to them. It's kind of like you being inside your house. Each one of those little cells is almost like a little house for the bees. And if you destroy that, they've got nothing. They have no place to store honey. They have no place, which is their energy supply. They have no place to store pollen, which is their protein source. They have no place to raise little bees, which is, what they have to sustain the colony. So you really need to have that extractor. That's the bottom line. You have to be the crush and strain thing. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Which means then you have to have an extractor, but there's a price range. Some people, if you only got a colony or two, a hand crank 2-frame extractor, which isn't very expensive, will work fine.
Yeah, but you also said something about doing extractions for other people. I mean, are there people
I don't
who
do that
will
anymore. I've gotten big enough that I
No.
don't have time to do that anymore. But you don't need a very big extractor either. So here's the thing. I extract between close to around 3,000 pounds of honey per year, and I have a 369 extractor. It's basically 3 frames at a time. And the way I do it, it's so fast I can't even uncap as fast as that thing will uncap. That's a small extractor. This not 36 inches wide. So you don't need a huge extractor. So somebody's trying to sell you a 12 or 20 frame extractor for $1,000 or $2,000. You don't need that. Unless you're going to be making 5,000 or 10,000 pounds a year and have hundreds of colonies, you don't need a big extractor. So you don't overspend. And my suggestion is that if you're not sure, ask one of the people on the hotline or ask one of us. Colin has experience with this. Sydney has. So do I. We can help you decide what size extractor you need for the size operation you're looking at in the future.
Great. And would you not ever, say you have a friend who does beekeeping, would you borrow an extractor, or could that also spread the
Sure.
the
No, you can do that. Yeah, the Franklin
You-
County Club, actually, where are you located?
Williamstown,
Okay.
northern
Well,
Massachusetts?
yeah, so it's a little out of range, but Franklin County, I think at one time did have an extractor. The Southern Adirondack Beekeepers, which is out of our territory, they have extractors that they loan out. But yes, you can borrow a friend's extractor, clean it up real well to start with, sanitize it, or have that person sanitize it before it leaves their place. They all have to be stainless steel these days, so you can sanitize them pretty readily. And absolutely, you can borrow an extractor. But use an extractor and just don't crush and strain. But yeah, that's a way to cut costs for sure if you're able to borrow someone's extractor. Yeah, good question. That's an excellent question too. Good point. So Ben, do you want to talk about the survival thing?
Yeah, so I've considered getting into beekeeping, but any time I talk to somebody who's tried, likely kind of amateur, everybody has had an issue where they've lost 1 or 2 colonies, and it seems like the survival rate is about 20 or 30%. So one of the considerations that's kept me off, aside from not having a good baseline knowledge, is what's the likelihood that I'm going to have a total loss my first and second year?
Unfortunately, there's no guarantee on that, Ben, and there's no
Yeah.
guarantee for any of us. Honeybees are really sensitive. The drought last year, weather has a huge impact on bees more than any other creature we tend, any other agricultural creature we tend. They're very, very sensitive. So something like a drought can affect their ability to overwinter because they end up with less resources going into winter. But that said, let's focus on the things that typically cause colonies to die out before they make it through the winter, which is usually it's ectoparasites, the Varroa destructor, which then transmits deadly viruses. The viruses have mutated over the years to become, some of the viruses never used to be an issue, but now they are very, very deadly. So the thing that I talked about in here, and the thing that you're going to get in a class, and anytime you go to meetings or workshops with clubs, they're going to talk about Varroa management. They're going to talk about pest management. That's Varroa destructor. And if you start that early in the season and you're religious about, and this is one of the time things that you have to be able to do, you can't take a break from this one. But at least every 30 days, and sometimes a little more frequently than that, you have to be checking on the levels of these parasitic mites, parasitic insects, the things that can harm the bees, and you have to keep their population under control. And that's the number one most effective thing that you're going to be doing as a beekeeper to keep your colonies healthy going into the fall and into the winter, so that you're most likely to have survival. A lot of beekeepers are not that great at that, and a lot of new beekeepers especially don't realize how incredibly important that is. And I have to admit, for my first 2 years, I didn't realize just how critically important that was. And so my losses tend to be 45. My losses were 45 or 50%, which is typical of what you see in the state in both commercial, migratory and non-migratory beekeepers. My success rate now is not better than 90%, and I'm running about 50 colonies. So I've gone from talking in terms of losses to talking in terms of survival rate of 90% or better. So it is possible.
Mhm.
And that's not just a 1 year thing. That's been going on now for several years. Once I got to a certain point, but it is possible to do that with just 2 or 3 colonies. It's hard, but the likelihood is that you should be able to get with what we're telling you here. And if you're religious with doing this learning that we're talking about, you should be able to get to the point where at least one of those makes it through the winter. And if you get one, that's a huge success, because from that one you can build a whole bunch more and still get honey. So it's a matter of consistently following the protocols established for pest and disease control. And then there's some other things along the way too, responding to weather conditions, winterizing properly the colonies, and also, assessing winterizing the hive, but also assessing the colony situation in the fall and getting them ready for winter too. There are some key steps, and we're going to tell you how to do that stuff throughout the year. So pay attention to these workshops, and we'll give you the best shot at being able to get colonies through the winter. And you probably will be successful if you are studious about following the protocols that we tell you about.
Okay, awesome. Thank
And
you.
the only way you're going to know, Ben, you can sit back and go on somebody else's experience, but if you're serious about this and you do follow the protocols, you may be able to be successful where others weren't.
Maybe we can let
I
Tim
see a
ask
hand.
his question. Yeah.
Hi, Fred. I have kind of a two-part question. I understand that all the areas across kind of the country have distinct flows and dearths, etc. And I'm just curious. I haven't really seen anything yet on what the pattern looks like for honey flow and the dearths in Vermont, and then like what implications that has on when you should or shouldn't split, kind of like the windows to do that. And then kind of secondarily to that, if you were to start a 2-hive colony, I have yet to get into it myself. How many extra like kits in addition to that would you suggest having in anticipation of having splits like you mentioned, going from to 5 in your first year?
I'm sure I didn't catch part of that, Tim. I'm sorry. Again, I'm having some garble coming through on this. So, Colin, did you catch that question? You're muted. Or Sydney? I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear you very well.
I also couldn't hear great. Maybe repeat. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it wasn't just me then.
Okay, apologies. Sorry, I'm so long-winded. I was hoping I could get some clarification on like what the season looks like in Vermont from like between honey flow and dearth cycle, and then what are the implications for when you do or don't split based on those time frames? And then second to that, how many kits do you advise for someone starting with 2 hives to have like extra hive kits in case you're doing splits?
Okay, so I understood the second part better than the first part still, but let me address the
The
second.
first part, or yeah, I'll
Yeah.
tell you the question after, Fred. Go ahead.
Okay, so the second part, it's hard to know. In the first year, you probably aren't going to be doing very many splits, so I wouldn't buy a whole lot of extra equipment the first year. Equipment is readily available. So if it turns out that you do need to make splits, the one thing that you will want to keep as a new beekeeper is that box that your nucleus colony came in. Keep that, because if you do need to do a split, that's where you can put them temporarily until you have regular hive equipment. You can also buy a thing called a Pro Nuke box, which is a plastic, more permanent thing, where you can also put a 5-frame split. You can make a 5-frame nucleus colony or 3-frame, but that's a place where you can put your split temporarily until you buy new hive equipment, rather than buying a bunch of equipment that you don't know you're going to need. I would just keep that nuke box that you got, or get a Pro Nuke box from one of the beekeeping suppliers, and always have that handy. And there are other reasons for having those boxes that we're going to talk about in a workshop coming up here soon on hive inspections. But that's where you can temporarily house one, and that way you're not buying a whole bunch of extra equipment. And so, Colin, you had caught the first part of that question?
Yeah, the first part of the question was asking about when the season in Vermont is for the honey flow,
Yeah, okay.
along with kind of like, monitoring the drought and doing splits, and when you would maybe not want to do a split in terms of the season.
Yeah, so, okay, those are good questions. So honey flow will depend on the weather. It's called nectar flow. It's not really honey flow, but the nectar availability from plants, whether trees, shrubs, or ground flora, start to become available when red maple starts blooming in the spring. There's not a lot of honey made at that point in time because the bees are consuming as much as they bring in, as they're basically pretty much low on food at the end of the winter, and that's their spring food. So they might make a little honey, but by the time the first big nectar flow is when the dandelions start to bloom, the first part of May. There's other stuff blooming besides dandelion. It's a very rich time of the year for plants blooming. When you see plants flowering, that's when nectar can be produced. So we're talking largely the biggest flows are going to be in May, June, and early July. Now, after that, the nectar can still be flowing, and it can be a massive flow. I'm telling you, with a good colony in the third, fourth week of June, you can be making a full box of honey per week. That's like 10 frames, 50, 60 pounds of honey per week per hive. I mean, that's how fast it can come in. And that's why it's really hard to be taking vacations during a time when your bees are that active. They can explode at that time of year. But then beyond that, and I'll get to the split thing in a second. Beyond that, the nectar flow slows down after basswoods bloom and after the trees get done blooming, and we're down to clovers, trefoils, wildflowers of various type, and some shrubs that are blooming on through to the end of the season. It can dry up totally, which is called a dearth. And last year it did dry up totally because we had a drought, an extreme drought where I am. But usually if there's sufficient rainfall, nectar will still flow, honey will still trickle in significantly, actually, through the end of July and even into August, which tends to be a dearth month until goldenrod starts blooming, and Japanese knotweed and a few other things later in the season. Nectar flow can pick up big time then as well. But if there's no drought, nectar will flow all year, but the massive flows come in May and June, early July, and then again late August, early September. Now, as far as splits are concerned, at 43 degrees, 42, 43 degrees north latitude, we have to be careful because our seasons are really short. So typically, we don't do splits much after July 15th. Just because if you're in the Champlain Valley, out near the lake where you're not getting inversions, where you're going to have a really long season, you can possibly get away with going as late as August 1st or so to do splits. The problem with is that the later you go in the season, the less time they have to develop a significant enough population that they can survive cold weather in the winter. So July 15th, you're pretty safe if you're at a high elevation or in the Northeast Kingdom. A little further north and a little higher elevations, you get up about 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet in that area. The seasons are much, much shorter. And so even July 15th might be pushing it. But anytime from May into the first part of July is probably safe for doing splits in most of the state and maybe a little further. And the low elevations are where you don't have temperature inversions. Does that answer your full question?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. I appreciate that. And apologies on the misspeak. I definitely know that honey doesn't grow on plants. So appreciate that.
We have a question in the chat too. If bees don't make it through the winter, I understand it's important to figure out why they might have died. Other than American foul brood, are there other reasons you would have to burn/destroy the woodenware, or is it common to reuse the woodenware
It's
after a dead
common
out?
to reuse. It's common to reuse. American foul brood is the only one where you actually have to destroy the colony and the woodenware. And the dead out diagnosis that we do each year, what we've added to that in the last year or two is not only can you reuse the frames, but do you have to do anything to those frames before you reuse them? So we've added that. So for like if your colony has this thing, has a thing called nosema, a high level of nosema, which is an intestinal parasite. Um, that you really can't treat in any way. You can, but generally don't. But in any case, if your colony died because it had a high level of nosema, those frames can be reused, but you have to go through a process of treating them, not treating them, but
Sanitizing.
aerating them with stuff like glacial acetic acid, which is it's like a concentrated vinegar. It's not a petrochemical or anything like that, but there are steps that you can take. Most of the time, you can reuse the frames. So the fact that you lost your bees, the one good thing about that is that you didn't lose what the bees did, which is make honeycomb. And most of the time you can salvage that honeycomb in the frames to reuse again, which gives your newbies one heck of a big boost. That answer that okay for you, Judy? Oh, that was in the chat. I'm sorry. Any other questions in the chat that you can see there, Sydney? I don't have my chat open here.
Nope, that's it for now, I think. Yep.
So the big thing is I'm taking that the people who are still on here probably are either have bees or are pretty likely to get some bees here. Is that the case? I'm seeing nodding. I can't see those that are off the screen. Do the raise hand thing if you already have bees coming here, but you're darn sure you're going to be doing this. Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that most of you are. Darn sure. Okay, I get that one. All right. So for those of you who are here, join the VBA, spend that $15 and get yourself in tune with the workshop series that's coming up, because they're phased in to help you at various stages along the season so that you know what you need to be doing in order to keep your bees healthy and keep them healthy enough to make it through winter. So that's the series that we have coming up. I think you'll enjoy them. There's a lot of information in each one. Yeah, okay. So, you're in St. Johnsbury and have 2 nukes. I got 2 nukes too, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I took that class 2 weeks before my bees came, and it was transformative. And then I sat in on these workshops that were coming up. We didn't have Zoom at the time, so I had to travel. But you do the same thing. You'll be able to get some in-hive stuff, but you'll also be able to learn a lot by Zoom. So lock yourself into that schedule that's coming up. It'll be tremendously helpful to you along the way. I hope to see a lot of your names again throughout the season here. Any other beekeeping questions or?
This is Barbara, and I have a quick question. I live across the street from a farm, and I do see them actively spraying. And so I'm only allowed to have 2 hives per my HOA. So am I kind of walking into a really bad situation here, and that I'm just probably going to have dead bees every year?
Well, not necessarily, Barbara. And Sydney mentioned something here earlier that was really important in your situation. And Sydney, you can chime in here in a second if you want. I think the key thing is to find out what your farmer is actually applying. If it's herbicide, it may or may not be as big an issue for your bees as if it's an insecticide. Insecticides are just deadly to bees, and like I said, at really low levels. Herbicides aren't good either, but one of the things you can do by talking to the farmer next door, don't be combative or anything like that. Just try to go. You're trying to gain information to help you with your bees, and that person may be able to tell you when they're going to spray. So maybe you can cover your hives if it's during the day. You can cover them in the morning so they're covered during spray time, and it is not 100% the answer, but it's better than doing nothing. But the key is to find out, number one, what that farmer is spraying, because it may or may not be really, really bad. It might be bad, but not so bad. And the other thing is you might be able to take some action to prevent your exposure. Sydney, you got anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just also say that honeybees can forage 2 miles or more away from their hive. So the likelihood that they're coming into contact with pesticides in the environment anywhere else is highly likely. And so most people are near a farm in Vermont. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily that would stop you from getting bees altogether. But yeah, I would just have a conversation with the farmer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did talk to him, and because I wasn't sure that my HOA would allow me to have them on our property. And I wanted to put them on the farm. And he's like, well, I can't because I have to give you 48 hours notice. And if something's going wrong with my crops, I want to treat them right away. Which, I mean, this is livelihood, I understand. But um, so I'm just feeling I'm nervous about everything. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
That's a healthy
Yeah.
way to feel, though, about
Yeah,
getting bees.
and Barbara, that's okay. That's okay. Go through this learning. If you really want to have the bees, I don't want that to stop you from having bees. Being nervous about it is part of what a lot of people experience when they first are thinking about or getting their bees. I tell you, Barbara, I looked at last year. I looked at a video that my wife took of me handling my bees my first year. It's like, who in the hell is that? Sorry about who's that klutz out there in the bee suit? It's like, I couldn't believe how klutzy I really was. But that goes away with time, and the same with the nervousness. And with the farmer, there's no legal requirement unless that's something specific to a certain pesticide for them to give you 48 hours notice. That's a voluntary thing. And that's something that you can just work out with the farmer if that's where you're going to have your bees, if that person will allow you to have the bees there. But that again is reiterating what Sydney already brought up before. Unless he or she's already told you no, um, communicating, just letting them know, you just need to know when they're planning, and you'll take action for your bees. That might be enough to satisfy that person. And again,
Mhm.
finding out what they're spraying really does matter.
Okay, I can definitely ask him about that. And I just wanted to put a plug out there. I think the reason that I'm just so nervous is that I did take a class last last year, and I was very lucky to have Sam and Sydney as my instructor at UVM, and such a great class. If anyone can take the hands-on beekeeping class at UVM, it's amazing,
Yep.
absolutely amazing.
Yep. There were some really good classes. Like I said, those instructors we listed on the slide earlier, they're all very knowledgeable and very, very good instructors, whether it's Sherry and Williamstown or the Butterbee folks, those they all have good classes. And I've gotten students down from that class at my apiaries. They send people out to various apiaries around the state, and I've had students from that class for the last few years, and it's a joy. A lot of these people are really, really sharp and will make excellent beekeepers if they decided they wanted to, and you're probably one of them.
Well, actually, I ended up the woman that I went with. She's been my mentor, Dana.
Oh yeah, we know
Um,
Oh,
Dana.
that's great.
Yeah,
yeah,
we were
so
just
I
at a meeting
went.
with Dana last night. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was observing her hives, and I don't know. We just
but Dana
started.
Dana is up in Franklin County in St. Albans area, so the rest of you know. She's also the recording secretary for the Vermont Beekeepers Association now, Dana Bresser.
That is really the most ideal thing if you can find somebody to shadow. until you become comfortable and you just really get to see different conditions of the colony. And so you're not just kind of thrown into it all by yourself. Yeah. Shadowing somebody else for a season would be, if you can find someone, is really beneficial.
Exactly. It does make a huge difference. I personally experienced it. I have one mentor in Putnam, Vermont, and another one in Baton Rouge, Louisiana right now. And so far, every mentee I've had has successfully overwintered their bees, every one. And that's a matter of, they took the time to learn, and then we try to give them the best advice we can as they go on. And that's the value. It worked for me too, having somebody who I could lean on. Nobody in any of the workshops I ever attended, which were at that point in time 30 or 40 different meetings and workshops that I had been to, ever talked about, what do you do when you have a swarm? And so I had a swarm, and I'm looking at thousands and thousands of bees in a cloud in my apiary. What the heck do I do now? On the phone to my mentor, 524 da. And he said, no problem, just do this, very calmly talk me through it. And sure enough, caught the swarm, and now it's been dozens of swarms later successfully caught. But that first one was a mind bender. It's like, what's going on now? But that's the value of having a mentor, somebody you can even just give a call to figure things out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm really looking forward to your fencing presentation in a couple weeks. It's my final step, so I'm really looking forward to hearing about.
Yeah, and it's a key step too. A lot of people put up electric fences and then bears walk through them, in part because the fence was good, but it's not working. And we're gonna talk about how you figure out if your fence is really working, if it's a deterrent, and how to make it so. So that'll be a good one for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank all of you who are here, and a lot of the folks have signed off, and thanks for all of you who've stayed on to the end here. And I'll tell you what, I wish you success. Stick with us this summer. We'll try to do the best we can to have you be number 2-year beekeepers, second-year beekeepers, I should say, which is a whole. And I'll tell you what, for the folks who are still here, beekeeping becomes really fun when you get to the second year. First year beekeeping is really just a pain in the butt, but you got to get through the first year to get to the second year, because that's when that's when you become a real beekeeper. That's when you learn how to read queen. When reading queen cells really matters, knowing when you're going to have a swarm and how to prevent that from happening. There's so many good things that happen in that second, when the colonies start bringing in 50 or 60 pounds a week, and suddenly you go from nothing to 500, I'm talking numbers, but hundreds of pounds of honey. I mean, that's when the good stuff really starts happening, is in year 2. And that's what we want to try to do, is to have you be able to have that experience. But that's when it really gets to be fun. And when you get to year 2, it's wonderful. Well, I guess with that, then we'll close. And thanks for hanging in there, all of you. And hope this is helpful. And we'll look for you in some upcoming workshops.
Thank you.
Take care.
Much, Fred. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Have a good night.
Take care.